What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Long Game Podcast hosted by Thomas Kopelman and Jacob Turner. In each episode, you'll hear us break down financial topics that are relevant to you and your situation. Our goal is to help bring credible financial information to you in short, bite-sized episodes.
All opinions expressed on this show are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on the Long Game Podcast should be considered advice. Always consult with your team of professionals before making any decisions regarding your finances. What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Thomas Kopelman, and super excited for today's show. So on the show today, we have Michael Girdley, and outside of being my most bookmarked Twitter follow, he has 12 businesses, 600 employees, and he's been doing this business thing for about 30 years. So we're going to dive into everything from small business to scaling businesses to taking one thing to finding your big thing. Michael, thanks for joining us.
Excited to be here.
So I wanted to start with this concept that you have these 12 businesses and everybody sees the success that you have had over the last 30 years. I'm curious from your perspective, when you first started, what was your goal 30 years ago as you got into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, man, it's tough to think back because I feel like I'm so much older than I was when I was 29. I'm 49 now, and it's like I'm a different person. I mean, I think back then I didn't even really know what I didn't know. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. That's what I knew I always wanted to do. I remember being a teenager, and that's just what I had decided I was going to do in my life. And that's how it's always been.
For you, as you think about, one question I get a lot is, or I see on social media, is people that are saying work hard versus work smart. And I'm curious what your perspective on this is, because I think you do an excellent job from the outside looking in, working really smart, making sure that you're doing really high value tasks in the businesses that you have today. But how and when do you think somebody should potentially make that transition from working hard to working smart? Because I've seen a lot of people fall into this trap of saying, I want to work smart, but then they fail to actually work hard to build the thing to be able to work smart.
So I think that's really a false dichotomy. Like, I think people are like, oh, you should work, be really smart so you don't have to work that hard at all. Like, in truth, like everybody I know that is a high achiever and is trying to do interesting stuff, they're all working their ass off. Right. And they're not just working their ass off. They're also working their ass off to be as smart as possible when they're doing that stuff. So, I mean, like everybody wants to trot out like the Elon Musk example, but like the guy works his ass off. Like he's a hard worker. You hear these stories of him at his like kid's birthday party, taking meetings. Have you heard these type of stories?
Yeah. There's actually a guy in our industry that's similar to that.
So yeah, so look, I think, and there's nothing wrong if you want to go through life having like a nice cushy job, working 9 to 4, like perfectly fine. If that's what you want to do, like get into wealth management. Am I right, guys? Like, no, I'm just kidding. Sorry, I try not to insult the hosts on every single podcast. But like the reality is people that are creating stuff, like they're pushing and you have to work hard. And along the way, you work hard at trying to be smarter each and every day. And so I don't buy that false dichotomy. I think it's just total horseshit. Like everybody I know that's achieving great things, they're all working their ass off. Like they're sacrificing to make things happen.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I've heard that too. And I don't subscribe to it either because like I think about like my business and where I'm at and the people that I've hired. I wouldn't say it's made my job any easier or that I've had to work any less hard. It just means I have to work harder in different areas, right? Like I feel like no matter what, I'm working 50, 60 hours a week, certain times more, certain times less if there's, less client meetings in the summer. But in general, it's delegate the tasks that, are maybe not the best use of your time and focus your time and attention in higher value areas where you can really grow the business and add value. But I work with a ton of business owners too. And as they grow, they become more successful, but I don't really see any of them working less. But I think that's really interesting because one thing that I really like about you, Michael, and something that you talk about that I don't think many people talk about is the stepping out of CEO role. And so I think when a lot of people would maybe see your content and hear you talk about like you grow a business and then you step away and you hire somebody, I think maybe they would think of this as like, oh, you're choosing not to work as hard or whatever. But I think the way that you talk about it is more like when it grows beyond me and me being the right person, I bring somebody else in. And I love the humility that shows in you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the compliment. I mean, I think I've learned very, very distinctly like my zone of genius is like in a very narrow circle, and like I should let other people work outside of that. And like, and I think there's nothing wrong with it. At its core, kind of what you're hinting about is that every person has their strengths and weaknesses, and that's kind of the first thing we can do is be true to ourselves and identify what's going to give us joy, where we're going to be great, and like just try to figure out how to focus on that one thing, and then get the other stuff like off our plate as quickly as possible. And so I'm a big believer in that. And maybe it's a cop out, but it sounds good to me when I say it, so I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, what is that area for you? I'm curious because I think it is really important, and I think a lot of the business owners that I see that aren't really killing it are the people that are in like 12 lanes, right? They're trying to do every single area versus spending the time in the area where is a combination of what you enjoy and what you're best at. Because like I don't remember who told me this, but I had this realization at least a couple years ago that like the way that I build my team is all about finding people who get energized to do the roles that really take, I don't know if taking the life out of me is the right way to say it, but I'm like, oh, like I got to go do that. That sounds terrible. The more of those things that I can get off my plate, the better our business does. And I mean, I feel that with all the people that I work with.
1,000,000%. Well, look, I'll tell you all the stuff I hate, and it also turns out to be the stuff I'm really bad at. Like I hate bookkeeping, I hate HR, I hate repetitive tasks, I hate doing the same thing over and over again. I dislike going to cocktail parties. I really dislike cold selling and things where I feel like I don't understand the social situation. Like I don't want to do any of those things. I am excited and thrilled by working on interesting new problems. I am excited and thrilled by getting into the psychology of another human being and helping them be their best self. I am excited by having insights and using that to create things that matter in the world. And I want to live in that second bucket of stuff and not in the first bucket of stuff. And so my job is to hire people and create systems so I don't have to do any of the first bucket of stuff.
I love that because I think there's a lot of power in just figuring out what you don't like. I think for a lot of people, it's, you ask them like, what brings them the most joy or what do they like the most or what do they want the most? And a lot of times people don't really have the answer, but if you kind of back into it of the things that they hate or they don't like, I think that can become really powerful. So I think that's an interesting way to frame it for yourself. But I'm curious,
so
going back to it.
I'm sorry.
You go.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have something I think is smart to add. So Jacob and I, went on a retreat together, and that's how we got to know each other. But one of the things we would do when we would talk to some of these folks who were trying to figure out their life and their role was instead of asking them to tell us what they really liked and what they really wanted to do with their life, they would give us, when we'd ask them that question, they would give us BS answers. They'd be like, well, it'd be all the stuff their mom wanted them to do or they thought they should do.
The American dream, picket fence, like those things.
Yeah. Or like, I'm supposed to be the CEO of this business and be out, being on CNBC or whatever. And it was just like bullshit. And I was like, does that stuff make you happy? And the way we could tell it wouldn't actually make them happy is instead of getting them to tell us at the macro what they thought they should be doing, we said, okay, tell us what your perfect workday looks like. Tell us what it looks like on a very perfect day for you. How does it all work out? And suddenly you'll see somebody, for example, who thinks that their mom or their venture capitalists or their investors or their wife wants them to go do XYZ or their spouse wants to go do XYZ. You'll see them describe their perfect day and it's full of ABC, the exact opposite stuff. And they're, instead of being on CNBC, they're, having deep work, right? And working on something and creating something that they can spread to the world or whatever. It's just like a totally different type thing. But I think that's what I encourage people to do. Instead of thinking about what name you want to have or what role you want to have or any of that kind of stuff, like think about what your perfect workday looks like and then build your whole career around that. And I just described to you all the stuff that my perfect workday is. There ain't no HR or accounting involved. I just tell somebody else.
Yes. So I've completely stolen that. And I ask everybody that question now, Michael, like, what is your perfect day? Because I've taken it so much from my perspective. When I first got done with baseball and I transitioned into this business world, I thought like, okay, well, I need to work hard, right? And I need to do these things. And I need to work 9 to 5 or whatever it is, because I'd never been in this situation where I had really complete autonomy to do whatever I wanted throughout the day. And I would get done with the day and then I would say like, well, was it a good day or not? And oftentimes I would say, well, I was really busy, but was it actually a good day? Did I actually move this thing forward? And did I actually enjoy what I was doing? Or did I do anything to get closer to what I was doing? But I never actually sat down and said, what do I want to do? Like if I wake up, what do I do right when I wake up that I actually enjoy doing? And that doesn't mean that everything that I do is easy, right? But it means that the things that are hard are things that I enjoy the challenge of, I enjoy doing it. So today I try to nail everything before essentially 10 o'clock in the morning. So I will wake up, I go for a walk, I come back, I write content, which I really enjoy. It helps me to think and stimulate. Then I go work out and then I do the rest of my day, right? And if I can do those things, I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to my perfect day.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it too. I think I'm curious of your answer on this because I think this sounds great. And to me, like I'm a business owner, so I feel like at least a little bit I get to do it. I think obviously there's busier times and busier days where maybe you have to deviate and you have to do a little bit more than what you want to do. But like for the people who have a little bit less control or you're really early on in a business, what would you say to those people? Because I think it's still a powerful exercise, even if it's not achievable today.
Look, let's full disclosure. Tomorrow, I'll probably end up doing some freaking bookkeeping and some HR work. It's just how it works. The goal is to make sure that ratio of how inspirational the things you do get to work on is 10 or 20 times the pain in the ass factor of having to do all that other stuff. And look, that's just the nature of business and what the process of creating is like, if you're going to make a painting, it's not all painting. Sometimes it's mixing the stupid paint. So, I don't want to mislead people and think that I just get to like do whatever I want all day long, but I do get to work my ass off to try to minimize the amount of time I spend on those things. And that's for sure. And so, I think that's the mindset to have with this. It's kind of like, the Buddhists talk about like life is suffering, right? Like work is going to suck. Personal life is going to suck. Your marriage is going to suck at some point. Your friendships are going to suck at some point. That's just the nature of the thing. And your job is to be constantly striving to make that better. And so that's how I think about that. And that's how I approached like any business creation. There's, or any business that I'm in, there's aspects of that are going to suck. It's just my job to do my best to try to minimize the suck in favor of the good stuff. And I think that's the way we should all look at it, whether we're on our first business or our 12th.
I really appreciate that honesty there because I hear this conversation all the time around like the perfect day and creating the business to be the perfect thing. And they really do leave out the fact that there is still going to be, I think a perfect world, 10 to 20% still sucks. Yeah. And that's just the reality of it. But if every year you could give like 1% more away to somebody you hire or something different, like you are at least taking steps to get there. But I think as a business owner or, even people who work from home, you do have a lot of control. I mean, Jacob, I think you shared the perfect example. Like I wake up every single day, I go cold plunge, I go sauna, I come back, I work, I do a bunch of stuff, get all my client work done. And then I do client meetings in the afternoon. And then like Mondays, I don't do any client meetings because I don't want to be on Sundays dreading like, oh, I don't know if I'm prepped and I have to, get ready for that planned delivery or something. And I think the difference of like, I see people who lack the control to make those decisions. The happiness that you can have in your life is very, very different when you do get that control. Even if the job does still have sucky parts, even if you still have to work a lot, at least you can create that ideal day.
Yeah. Yeah, the psychologists call that an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. It's basically this idea of do you feel like you have the influence to create the world that you want to have? And I think that's the best part of entrepreneurship, right? Like it's built that you get to basically like define your professional life and your personal life, and it's all on you. It's also why when things go bad in entrepreneurship, it hurts so much because you have nobody else to blame but yourself.
Totally.
And then, Jacob, you and I were talking about kind of the generational stuff. It's one of this locus of control thing is actually one of the biggest problems with young people now is the largest percentage ever of teenagers feel like they have an external locus of control where they're coming out super depressed because they feel like it's out of their control whether they get to have a great life or not. And to me, that's like super sad, but also makes me very thankful for the life that I've worked hard to create.
Yeah. Well, think about the person at 3 that finished their workday and they know like, well, I got nothing to do, but I got to sit there for 2 hours, right? Like I would much rather have sprint weeks and then today I finished at 3 and like, great, I'm going to go enjoy my day and take advantage of that. But like, I can totally see how that's going to detract from your happiness when like 9 to 5, I mean, it might be your job, but it's almost a prison in the way that like, don't you dare leave. Like, it doesn't matter what's going on. If you leave, you don't have that control. I think that's like one of the best parts of being an entrepreneur is yes, we have all this added stress. Yes, like, you don't get to shut off on Saturday and Sunday, maybe even weeknights. I mean, a lot of those things can be really hard, but you don't have to worry about like necessarily like the shackles or whatever it might be that stops you from being able to make the decisions that are best for you. But you also do have to be the person that's going to go get stuff done, even though you could not work today if even if you have a ton of work due tomorrow.
Yeah. Michael, one of the things that I really have enjoyed about getting to know you, both from just following you online and seeing a lot of your content, and then us getting together in person, is although you have had all this success, you have 12 plus businesses, you manage 600 employees, a lot of the things that you talk about are relevant for people at any stage, which is really unique because you talk about things that are really relevant for a business owner that has one employee. And you also talk about things that are relevant for somebody that's building a holding company. And you have this great tweet that you talk about niche businesses and you talk about the fact that when you're starting your first business, it should cash flow. So here's 7 great lifestyle examples of these businesses. One of those examples is being a wealth manager. I'm curious, what is your advice as you think about like talking to like, you talk to somebody that says, Michael, I love what you're doing, but I want to get into entrepreneurship. Here's what step 1 looks like, because I know you came from the venture capital world. So it's interesting to see you writing tweets about cash flowing businesses where your background isn't actually in that world.
Yeah. Well, my career started working for other people and I went up through the corporate ranks and learned a lot about how that kind of world worked. And then, my first entrepreneurial venture was really joining our family business. So like whatever, born with a silver explosive, it was a fireworks business, born with a silver explosive in my mouth. So that's for real there. But yeah, I think as I've spent more time looking at the types of businesses that a person starting out should start, cash is king early on. The more you can be in a low capex requirement business to start out with, I'm a huge, huge believer in that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or not, but like that's really the advice that I give folks that are starting out. Figure out how to get into an entrepreneurial venture that can generate cash as quickly as possible.
Well, I think a lot of people think about entrepreneurship and they think about this giant risk that they're taking, right? If they're going to go from corporate America and they're going to go start a business, because they often think from the outside looking in, like this is going to take some massive capital expenditure. And I think the tweet that I'm referencing, you're really talking about businesses that have very low capital expenditures up front, right?
Yeah.
Yes, you're going to have to take some risk on the fact that like you're not going to have that solid W-2 income. But the reality is you could start these businesses and within a week you could have your first customer and you could be cash flowing something.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, everything from wealth management's harder, right, to cash flow too. But do you want to have your own job tomorrow? Like go start a bookkeeping business. Like there's just an inexhaustible demand for that. Is your business ever going to get that huge? No. But you can start that pretty much immediately. And to some extent, I think people see it as a very binary outcome. Like, okay, I'm going to go borrow $5 million from the SBA to go either start a franchise or go buy a business, or, I can have a W-2 job and there's no in between. Well, there's a path here where you save 6 months to a year of living expenses and then go just try to find some customers. And if it doesn't work out, you just go back and get another job. Like I like that kind of middle path around doing an agency business or wealth management or any of the number of ones that I mentioned. I think are much preferable paths for many people. For sure.
We lived in the outsourced world now, right? Like there's all the small businesses, they need an outsourced CMO, an outsourced CFO, an outsourced bookkeeper. They need somebody to do their taxes. They need somebody to help them on their finances. Like it's really easy to create these like job businesses, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts on buying versus building businesses?
100%. Look, I think, I think one of the things that people will come in, and maybe this is why I'm like really bad at social media, is like people come in and social media.
You're bad at social media with 200 plus followers on Twitter, 200,000 plus followers on Twitter. He's terrible on social media. Don't follow him.
But like what social media wants you to do is they want somebody in my shoes to come in here and be like, you know what you need to do? You need to go buy a franchise. That's the only way. Or you know what you need to do? You need to go take this one path and buy a business. Or you need to go like join a private equity firm. Or you need to go start your own like that's what social media wants you to do, is have a hot take on it. And look, I think that there are trade-offs in every single one of these paths, and none of them are going to be perfect, but there is a perfect one depending upon your situation. So for some people who are coming out, say maybe with industry knowledge, they're better operators than they are creators. They have a level of appetite for risk, and the connections to find a good deal, like going and borrowing and buying an SBA business. Terrific, right? Or doing the VC path where they feel like they have the connections and that's the right thing for them. That's also right for some people. Then there's the bootstrapper type services businesses stuff that I talked about. And then I think having a W-2 job is like a great outcome as well. Like I think those are all valid paths. And I think where people get it wrong is they start to think about, okay, well, one of these strategies is better or worse objectively, but the reality is each of us, I think, wants to live a specific lifestyle. I want to live a whole co-style lifestyle, and I want to do what I'm doing. So I'm going to craft my strategies around that rather than let some strategy I think is interesting or sexy or my mom thinks is cool or my dad thinks is cool or my MBA classmates will be inspired by it. Like rather than let that define what I'm going to do, I'm going to choose the life I want to live, and then I'm going to define my business around that. So I am very pro business buying. It's not for everybody, but for the people that it's right for, like go ahead and do it for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting distinction between the type of person and what makes sense because, I work with some people who bought businesses and, I have a new client who they bought a business post-COVID for like $2 million and then they netted $2 million in their first year. So it's like, that's really
Amazing.
cool, right? Like that's maybe not the reality for most people, but I think a lot of the times when I see people, I have a ton of people I meet with or work with that they're just waiting to buy the right business. And it's been years and years and years. And I'm just like, do you not have the confidence in yourself to be able to grow a business?
Right.
And, I think that not everybody's a natural salesman, but I think if you can start a business you're excited about with what you talked about, right? 6 to 12 months, if not even more cash on the sidelines, your life depends on it. And it's something that you're interested in. You're going to turn into a salesman, right? There's really, I don't know anybody who operates their business that isn't naturally trying to sell their business because they love what they do and they believe that it is a value add. And I remember starting out in the industry, and obviously wealth management is very different. I started at a broker dealer and it was about selling to people, and I just like couldn't get behind it because I knew I wasn't necessarily being pushed to do like good financial planning. But now when I'm in the space where I'm actually helping people do good financial planning, it's really easy to want to attract people to work with you because you feel like you're adding something, right? Like, hey, I know I can help you save on taxes and plan your future. So it's really easy for me to talk about what I do. And so I think there's just this disconnect for people that like, if you get behind a business that you're improving other people's lives in some way, you're naturally going to want to sell. And so maybe instead of waiting 3 to 5+ years to find the perfect business online or the perfect opportunity for you, it might just be the time to go start a business and learn and put yourself out there. Cause I think that's what a lot of people are scared to do.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then, I mean, there is a whole psychological thing where people will do a lot of what you're talking about. There's a percentage that they're using the search for a business to make them feel like they're making progress, but they never are going to pull the trigger to buy anything. They always have an excuse. So look, I can't help those people, but maybe they should go back and get a job. That's totally fine with me.
For sure.
That's another thing going on with some of those folks. But yeah, I mean, the times I've tried to buy businesses and done acquisitions and stuff, like, I don't know how people work on it for 3 years. Like, I just can't, I don't have patience for that. Like, we got to get something done. So let's figure out how to get it done the next 6 to 9 months. Cause I don't even know if I'm gonna be around next year. So that's the one thing I would tell those people, like, move faster. Like, you should be able to find a business. There's a lot of them out there. Like, just try harder. So
Michael, one of the things that I think you're uniquely positioned to do and you do really well is managing people, which I think is something that is often overlooked in businesses until you have to do it.
Yeah.
And you have this great, I think it's a free PDF download you put out that talks about like how to work with Michael. And I stole it and I love it. And we're both 6'5". And one of the things that you had told me, you're like, I didn't really realize this, but people sometimes are intimidated by me because I walk up and I'm 6'5". And this download essentially gives people an outline of like, here's who I am as a person. Here's what this means when I say these things. And it gives them almost like this 6-month head start where it might take them 6 months to really get to know you. I'm curious how you've been so introspective to help lead people, and what has been your experience growing to leading 600 plus people?
Yeah. Well, so a couple things. I do think there's a big distinction between leading and managing. I'm actually a pretty bad manager, and I feel like I'm a pretty great leader, right? So leaders, as I think about it, leaders are the people that, you worry about culture and vision and direction and vibe, right? Managers are like tasks, KPIs, priorities, right? Like, and do that stuff. I actually suck at all that management stuff because mostly I really hate it. So I end up having to be very careful about the type of people that report to me or that I work with, because I will lead the hell out of them. But when it's time to hold people accountable or manage tasks or like do annual reviews, like I'm doing annual reviews right now, and it's like, Thomas, to your point, like that's the bucket of stuff. I'm like, I hate this. Just is a lot of work, and I got to remember all these details and have confrontations. I'm not interested in any of that stuff. So, I think that's one of the things I've learned over time is, man, I suck at managing. I'm pretty darn good at leading, and that makes me have to bring on the right people. In terms of how that translates into the day to day, right? Like the way I feel like I've managed to start to understand myself a lot is, number one, a lot of introspection, see when things went wrong, pay attention to my feelings and understand how I was feeling when stuff happened. Number two, being in a CEO peer group, and doing some of the stuff that you and I did, Jacob, when we went on that mastermind together. Like those are great ways to really learn about yourself. And especially when you're in a group of people that feel comfortable telling you the truth, you can start to really hear it, right? And start to internalize that and understand where you're good and where you're not good. So I would say those have been the keys. And then the last thing is just life is really good at like just being harsh, right? Life tells you the truth, right? Like, so, for everybody, including myself, that you look up and feel like they've made a lot of progress, there are some crater failures and huge mistakes that I've made along the way. And they've been great opportunities to learn, and for me just to try not to make the same mistake again.
So this is kind of the thought for you of hiring CEOs, right? Is you feel like the CEO role for a lot of these businesses is really the people manager role. So what role do you stay in, and when do you actually make those hires? Like when's kind of the right time? And I think this is really important because I think I talk to a lot of people, and the reason why they don't grow beyond lifestyle practices or whatever, right, is because they're similar to you. And I think I'm similar to you in that way that like I love the vision and growing the business, but I don't necessarily love people management and those reviews and everything that goes on. So I think a lot of people say, well, then I'm going to keep the business this way. But I think what you've done really well is you've still taken that, grown it, but kept yourself in the right role.
Yeah. Well, my role in companies now, I went through a process where I would start companies and I was the CEO. That doesn't scale very well because really you can only do the CEO job once.
Unless you're Elon.
And he doesn't really. Not that he cares. I mean, go look at the org chart for Tesla, now Twitter, all these places. There's an operator who's just not a public figure that runs all those businesses. There's an actual CEO there. He's much more like a visionary chairman when you look at it. And he meddles with stuff, but by and large, there's somebody really doing all the work at Tesla. And at SpaceX, there's a lady there too as well. Like there's real CEOs for these businesses. It's just a bullshit title, to be totally transparent with you. So anyway, fair. You can only do it once. Nowadays, when I incubate new businesses or spring stuff up, there is always a leader there from day one. And that's something I learned how to do a few years ago. To where it's like, okay, well, I'm going to learn how to incubate businesses, but I'm never going to be the CEO, and I'm just going to be helpful and be a board chairman. And that's where I find my best, is where, I'm providing the governance for the company, supporting the CEO and helping them be his or her best. And ultimately, like, I want to be a partner in creating the vision for the company. But when I'm a board member, I think that the best person to put together the ultimate vision for the company is the CEO, because the CEO is the one in there actually talking to customers every day. I'm not, Like any decision or vision I'm going to make is not going to be as educated as theirs is going to be. So yeah, I want to live in an idea space, and that's where I do really well. But ultimately, who I want to be coming up with the vision and leading that vision creation process is the CEO of the business, because they're just going to do a better job than I ultimately will.
How hard was it when you were the first time you moved from CEO to hiring a CEO and like fully giving up the reins? How challenging was that process?
It's super hard. Yeah, because you have to, like, when you make that transition to go, say, from say you own a small business and you go from CEO to board member, you have to change like every single one of the things you've been taught over the past 10 years as CEO to do, right? So like, for example, if something goes very wrong in a small business and you're the CEO owner, right? What do? You sprint to that problem, you start trying to solve it, you start trying to figure it out, you get your hands dirty, there's a crisis, you're going to deal with it. When you're the board chairman and somebody else is the CEO and they tell you about a problem, you have to say, well, that sounds terrible. What would you like for us to do about that? Totally different response. And you also secondarily have to have a level of trust in the people that are going to be in the seats to take care of the problems, because you're not operational when you're a board chairman or a board member. So you can't be going in there doing their job, because that just creates messes and they never actually do their job. So, for me, having that level of trust, the self-confidence, and then having and unlearning all those habits that I had had from being a CEO for years, that took a number of years. It didn't happen overnight. It's not as easy as it sounds. And it's ultimately, when I tell people you're going to be making this transition to go from active to passive in your business, expect it to be bumpy and expect it to take a while, because it's not like you just flick a switch and it all happens.
So, how do you find these CEOs, for one? And two, what are the qualities you look for in these CEOs?
Yeah, so shocking, finding CEOs is not that hard. There's tons of people who want to be CEOs of small businesses, whether they're newly starting businesses or whether they're established businesses. You can actually get a ton of great candidates just advertising the job, like treating it like anything else. You advertise for a controller, well, why don't you advertise for a CEO? Like, write a great job description and go from there. And then, in terms of what I look for, I have learned after hundreds of good and bad hires to have a very in-depth hiring process. And it's all based on the science of what predicts how people are going to perform well in jobs. And there's 6 things that kind of predict better who's going to be a really strong player above everything else. So I have like a 10-step hiring process that I run through that type stuff. But the stuff I'm looking for are a lot of things you're looking for in a typical employee. What sort of skills are they coming in with? What is their culture like? What is their attitude like? What are their personal aspirations? How does that gel? Do I want to spend time with them? Do they want to spend time with me? I will look at all that kind of stuff. But I will tell you, people have asked, like, okay, you've got, say, 12 CEOs working, and I've dealt with dozens more. What has been the distinguishing characteristic? And the ones that succeed the most are the ones with the highest amount of grit, right? You've talked about that concept. They want it more. They try harder. They don't give up. They're more passionate about it. They focus more on the mission rather than themselves. Like, whoever has the most grit, those are the highest performing CEOs that I work with. They just refuse to fail. And if I can see that definitely in the behavioral interviews and stuff that I do, that's a really good sign that they're going to have grit when they come work with me, and that we're going to win together.
How do you incentivize them to have grit, right? So when you own the business and something goes wrong, and this is something that I think about a lot, right? If something goes wrong in my business, nobody's going to care about it more than I'm going to care about it. So when you implement and you put a CEO in that role to establish grit and to establish them really caring about this, what steps do you take? Is it more focused on finding the right person that has the same mission, or is it a combination of mission and also the monetary value that they're going to get if they see this business succeed?
Yeah, look, I've had people with grit and without grit, and it's not correlated to how much equity they own or what their comp plan looks like or any of that kind of stuff. I'm a big believer that the grit really comes from how you're wired and where this is in your position, in your life trajectory. And, you know, I think there's people that come in and they're just wired with grit, and that's just how they've learned to be as human beings. And then there's people that come in without it, and you can find it in their behavioral interviews. In the behavioral interviews where you go through and you just walk through the way they behaved and how they look at that behavior in retrospect. And you do that through the interview process, and you'll start to see a pattern of grit. They're just people that don't give up. They don't lose. They were people that were the smallest guy on the basketball team, right? Like Jacob, the guys that you played with who were the Steve Kerrs of sports, or they were, you know, the person who barely made it onto the math, you know, the math Olympics team, stuff like that, but they made it up through grit and trying harder. And, you know, you combine that type of behavior with smarts and magic happens. But yeah, like I haven't figured out how to impart that in people. Like they seem to show up either with it or without it. My job is to figure out if they have it or not.
That's interesting. I always use this line that in every locker room I've ever been in, I've probably been in 30 different locker rooms full of people. It's essentially the same people. They just go by different names. And as you were talking about that, I can always think about those couple people. And Thomas, I know, I'm sure you feel the same way with basketball. Like people that you had on your team, you're like, that guy is just a gamer. You know, like you just know without a shadow of a doubt, like he might not have the most skills in the team, but like if he's out there, you know that like he is giving it his all and there's never a question about it. Whereas some of the other guys, maybe they have more talent and you're like, all right, is he going to come to play today?
Yeah. I don't know if you guys followed the old San Antonio Spurs, but we had a guy named Avery Johnson. He's known as the Little General. He's part of the early championship teams. Played with like David Robinson, those guys, and he was like this little 5'11" guy, no talent whatsoever, but like he was just out there. And there's these great pictures of him like just so passionate about what's going on and so much grit about the thing and just refusing to lose, and like him just like screaming at his 7-foot tall teammates like to do stuff differently because he was so intense about the whole thing. And it was one of the ones I always remember. So
those are the people you want for sure.
Little General.
Love it. So I'm curious for you, Michael. Obviously, not that many people ever run a business, but not that many people get to run a lot of businesses. In your experience, what are some of like the core or like similar mistakes business owners make, and maybe they're ones that you have made along the way that people could learn from?
Yeah, 100%. Look, I think there's lots of mistakes. I've made a lot of these. You know, one that comes to mind is letting the business define your lifestyle versus the other way around, right? Like, I think it's very easy when your business first starts. You could think about like an infant, right? Like that infant, when it's young, you have to sacrifice everything to keep that infant, you know, fed, slept, clean diapers, all that kind of stuff. But then I've seen people lots of times when their business grows to adolescence or adulthood, and it should be making them a ton of money and creating an amazing lifestyle for them, they're still treating it like it was a little baby, and they're up all night, you know, giving it a bottle every 2 hours. And so I've done that too, where I've looked up and been like, wait a second, who owns this business? Does the business own me, or do I own the business?
That's
and
good.
So I've seen that mistake happen a lot. Especially if you're very driven, you can look up and be like, wait a second, that's there. I've seen it and had it happen to friends where they've let the inmates take over the asylum. And I don't mean that and by that, I mean, like, you look up and like all the employees are making all the money and not working very hard. And the managers are not getting out of it what they should be getting out of it. And I mean that in the nicest way. They're teammates. They're not inmates, but you see what I'm saying? I've seen mistakes also, and I've done this one where, you know, a business, clearly starts to transition from where it was super viable and had a lot of tailwinds to one where there's headwinds, and you know it's going to be at the end of the road for the business, and you don't get ahead of that as soon as you should. That's another one I've seen people for sure make. And then obviously the last one, and I've done this numerous times, you don't stay on top of cash flow, and you look up and you're like, hey, Dad, can I have some money? I need to hit payroll. And so that's happened, you know, as well. And those are some hard lessons learned from that. So don't run out of money, kids. It sucks.
Goes back to finding businesses that cash flow. Well, one thing that you do, that there's two people that I've got to know in the past couple of years that do this, and you do this religiously, but you always ask for feedback. And it was one of my biggest takeaways from the time that we spent together, right? You're around these successful people. And the thing that I noticed about you, Michael, was you're a really good listener, or at least you seem like you're a really good listener. Maybe you're not listening at all, but you sit there very quietly and you kind of take everything in. And then you say your piece, which I thought was really interesting. But then you also always ask for feedback. Like, how could I do better at this? Anything that you noticed. And that's something that I've really taken in my own life. And it's been interesting for me because oftentimes when I ask for feedback, people are almost surprised I'm asking for feedback. So what led to you doing that? And how have you seen that benefit you in your own life?
Yeah. Well, so I have been exposed to a lot of the foibles of American society by going to visit other societies, right? And like one of the stories I tell is that I joined a team of Mexican national cyclists here in San Antonio, and so it was the name of the team was the Cyclones, but it was really Los Ciclones because it was all Mexican dudes. And like about 3 months in, like I'd be joking around with them, and I was all this type of stuff, and I'm learning Spanish and joking around. And one of them started calling me gordito, like little fatty. I was like, well, I'm not fat, and like I'm not little. But what I eventually realized was that was a term of endearment. Like they were welcoming into the group because they knew that I could take it, right? And like the Latinos will be like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. They'll be like super mean to each other. Like if somebody has a lazy eye, like they'll call them lazy eye to their face. Like that's the guy's nickname. Or if somebody's like super skinny, they'll call them like flaco. Like it's like the meanest thing ever. And, so if you have something wrong with you, they're going to call you that. And it's meant to some extent as a term of endearment, and people don't take it very seriously. So that really opened my eyes as I traveled around and talked to more people from other cultures to understand, like, we don't get much feedback and we really don't get much truth, from our friends or even from our family or from other, like everybody is so afraid of offending each other in America these days that you never really get a lot of data about what's going on. And for me, that said, okay, look, I want to get better. I want to be improving all the time. And the only way I'm going to do that is with data. And I'm not going to get it unless I go actively search for it. Because I'm not going to hear those things. People are so terrified to offend somebody else or say something that's going to bother them, that we just keep our mouths shut. And so, that's where I became very intentional about it and started experimenting with like different ways to try to just get more data, try to get better.
Yeah, I found it to be super beneficial. I essentially try to do that in every situation now. And I've just seen so much benefit, I think, for people listening. Like if you can ask for feedback, oftentimes you can accelerate whatever your journey is. Because I've even noticed, and Thomas, I'm sure you've seen this, when we're working with other professionals, right, on somebody's team. I've worked with partners at law firms that have been there for 20 years. And I'll get done with the meeting and I'll say, surely nobody's ever given them any feedback, because I could tell they're doing this thing in the meeting that if they got feedback on it, they would have never done that.
Right.
But they've never asked for feedback. And oftentimes we don't know what our blind spots are. We're not sitting in front of a camera like we are right now all the time. So you don't know that maybe you're saying that thing or you're doing this facial thing that just looks terrible in the meeting, and you just wish somebody would tell you. And even for me, I mean, I partner with my brother in our business, and having him give me feedback, it sucks. Let me tell you, like when he comes in and he gives me feedback, like it is not fun to hear it. But I'll tell you right now, like it has elevated my game so much by getting that consistent feedback. So I just encourage anybody out there, like if you're in any sort of business that you have any sort of communication, which is essentially everybody, ask for feedback.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. All right. So wrapping up, Michael, closing words, advice that you would give to, some of the business owners, or I guess even, if you don't want to go the business owner lens, just, people that are listening.
Yeah, look, I think I'll give you something from the perspective of a 49-year-old. Like I'm starting to watch people around me get health problems and get challenges, and it's happening to young people, old people. I'm starting to see the people around me get old and die. Like my grandparents aren't alive anymore. All this goes by really quick and it goes by really short. So as much as you can, I would encourage people, like, make sure you're having fun. Try to have fun at work. There's lots of things we can all choose to do these days. Like it goes by really quick, and the best you can do is just try to figure out a way to make it as entertaining and fun alongside people that you like as possible. And, if possible, do it, because it goes by fast. It really does.
It's a perfect way to close. Well, Michael, we really appreciate you coming on and sharing all the wisdom with us and our audience, and everybody. We thank you for listening. Please rate, subscribe, and we will see you back next week.